episode 69 of the Slip and Weave podcast. My guest this week is fellow ITRBoxing contributor Jack Kelly. Jack, thank you for your time today, my friend. Just go ahead, introduce yourself, let the people know a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Jack Kelly. I'm 22 years old. I'm a communications major right now in college. And just like you said, I'm a fellow member of ITR, a contributor, a writer, reporter a bit. And just thank you for having me on the show to chop it up.
Jack, you're 22, bro?
Yep, I am. Mm-hmm.
That's wild, bro. I didn't know you were that young, bro.
Yeah, no, I am still in college. I got one more year of college still too. So, I got I got time on my side for sure. So it's definitely good.
Well, and I don't mean to say that like I'm like an old guy, but it's rare that like a 22-year-old kid has like an appreciation for James Toney.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, for sure. I always like to, just study the old school kind of guys and just get the respect for just the guys that came before us. So most definitely. Yeah,
I mean, dude, I obviously for anyone that hasn't gotten to see it, and I'll make sure I leave a little link down below. Jack just had a big interview with James Toney on the ITR page. Talk to me a little bit about what that was like, and just I know that James at times can get like a little bit of a reputation, but he seemed like such a good dude.
Yeah, no, he did. And obviously we did it with Nigel, who's a fellow ITR member also. He's the one who's been going back and forth with James. And like you said, I mean, just the interview went great. And just with some of those guys, you're not really sure how they're going to react in real person, in real time when they talk to you. But he was just grateful to be there, just so interactive with us. And it really was dope to see just how he was, because he was just as happy to be there as we were, it seemed. And that's always good to see. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, he seemed, and I've seen some of the interviews where he goes off, and
yeah,
but that's part of what makes him so cool is it's just like he is a real guy, but he's also always been, like a first-rate entertainer.
Yeah, absolutely. He's always like, that's why you said he's a real guy too, and he'll tell you exactly what's on his mind too. So that's why you always have to respect about him, because he's not going to sugarcoat anything. If he believes something, he'll say it. That's why we wanted to set up the questions in a way too where he could kind of take it in whatever direction he wanted to go to. Like you said, he kind of has that edge to him. So if he wanted to take it one way or another way, we were fine with kind of whatever way he wanted to take it. But it definitely went well. So it was good. I'm grateful for the opportunity for sure.
So I was thinking about kind of what James's legacy is in boxing. And one of the things that I thought of, I'm curious what you think about this, is that he's kind of the last of like an era, even before his era, where it was much more common for guys to have, almost 100 professional fights, which he did, right? He had like 90 something professional fights. What do you think about that and just kind of what he represents, his place in the sport?
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's funny that you say that too, because one of the things we mentioned for him, one of the questions I had for him was because he was fighter of the year in 1991 and then also in 2003. So that's like a 12-year gap, which is really crazy. You don't see it. I know it's from middleweight to heavyweight, I'm pretty sure too, because that was right after the Evander fight. And he had just said kind of what you had said, just the old school mentality of just staying in the gym and staying also in the ring. Like obviously at the young end of his career, at the early part of his career, he was fighting 10, 12 times a year, and then even 4 or 5 times a year when he was,
right,
really getting going. So I think that really does speak to just that old school mentality, like you said, just him keeping himself active. So I think he definitely, as you talk about legacy wise, I mean, just being able to win belts at middleweight, super middleweight, light heavyweight, cruiserweight, and then even to compete at heavyweight. I mean, not many guys all time are able to say that. So I think his place in history, and I think that's why it was good to also see him get in the Hall of Fame too, because we all figured it was going to happen, but just for him to officially get in, he deserves it too. There's a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame that he's done more than too, so it's definitely good to see him get in.
Yeah, I think that James was a guy that could always like reinvent himself. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Like even if he took a couple of L's, like he had a couple of L's in his career that don't even really make sense when you look at the totality of his career, but he always found a way to reinvent himself either at a new weight class or, and then he would beat guys that you didn't expect him to beat. You know what I mean? So he always had this way of, okay, my middleweight career was one thing, but now I'm gonna, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I said too, because when he went from 160 then all the way up to heavyweight, he showed obviously the Philly shell or shoulder roll. He did a lot of those same things, but it was in a different way. It was kind of a different style of James Toney. I think that was obviously to his benefit too, because you just can't be the same exact fighter through all those weight classes for that long too. So he definitely changed it up a bit.
Yeah, he definitely at the lower weights when he was younger, there was a little more like he was a middleweight, so it was more speed based. And then as he moved up in weight, it was like what I always thought was crazy, especially like the Evander fight and the Zhirov fight. He was so accurate at the higher weights. in ways that like a lot of the guys that he's fighting just weren't.
Yeah, no, his precision and just his then just like this little subtle slip, because he wasn't obviously using his legs as much as the little subtle slip movements and just that accuracy. Like I said, at that high weight, not many guys are able to do that, so he used that to his advantage.
I'm genuinely curious about this. What was, because I'm guessing when you were a kid, right? He was probably already retired.
Yeah, basically. I mean, I remember just fail, and even just like the tail end, even just like obviously him coming to the UFC, fighting Randy Couture. Obviously, I remember him more as a young kid for those kind of things than I did. I always knew who he was as a boxer and went back to watch his fights, but yeah, no, I wasn't able to really watch any of his big fights live at all. So I mean, I was able to get my fair share of looking him up and watching them, but not when I was around at all. No.
It was really, when I'm 29, I'm not that much older than you, but when I was a kid, it was like to find old fights, you had to buy DVDs.
Yeah.
So I remember I had like this whole stack of like James Toney DVDs and Roy Jones DVDs.
Yeah.
And I just had like this crazy collection of just like old fight videos. Anyway, before that there was like YouTube, and this was like 2003. So this is like pre-YouTube. Do you get to watch any of the fights this weekend?
Yeah, I did. So I watched most of them. Just the only one that I didn't watch live was the cruiserweight one, the Breidis fight, which is funny though, because they were saying it was going to be like 5 a.m., 6 a.m. or whatever. It ended up being like late morning. I just didn't realize by the time I was getting up, it was basically ending. But I did end up seeing still most of the fights this weekend, and kind of a not the biggest weekend for boxing, but we still had fights going on. So it was definitely still a good week.
There was a couple of decent ones, man. Did you see Zolani Tete's knockout of Jason Cunningham?
Yeah, no, I did see that. And he looked, I mean, just honestly, that was a fight on the odd that was basically 50-50. And Tete is a guy who, obviously, not a lot of guys, I still haven't seen too much of him, but he was a multi-weight titleist, and he is skilled and stuff. So his jab and footwork just looked great early on, and obviously ended up closing the show pretty early there also. So he looked really good.
I think the only time I had seen him was when he fought Casemiro, and he didn't win the fight. He got walked through.
Yeah.
So this was my first time kind of seeing him as him. And I was very impressed with it, man. He was super patient. Like his jab was nice and long the whole fight. He kind of just waited for Cunningham to get antsy and just show more class. I think at 122, he's like 5'10". I think he's like maybe a problem for a lot of these guys.
Yeah, I think he can be. I mean, just that, obviously, that southpaw stance, the jab, the footwork. He is skilled too. And obviously, they kind of brought him in as it was a 50-50 fight. But obviously, as the opponent, as he's been in a lot of fights, they were hoping that Cunningham would be able to kind of outbox him and stuff. But I mean, Tete showed that he's got a lot left in the tank still. And like you said, I mean, if someone else wants to fight him at 18 or 22, if they want to bring him in for an opportunity, they better be ready to go because he's there for sure still.
Was that fight at 18 or 22? I actually
no, I believe it was at 22. But he's fought at 18 before. I think he's fighting at 22 now, though. I believe it was at 122.
And even just like when I think about the top at 122, Fulton and Akhmadaliev, and we'll even talk about those guys in a little bit, but I don't think of any of those guys as crushing punchers the way this guy is.
Yeah.
There's really, other than Inoue, there's nobody in that weight neighborhood other than this guy that's like one punch, put your lights out.
Yeah, I agree. And that's it, like you said, I mean, that's an X factor going forward for him too. Even some of these fights where obviously the Casemiro fight didn't go his way, but if he's in a high level fight against these guys, he might be losing a bit in the fight, but that power is always going to be there and be dangerous at that weight class. So I know it'll be something to look for going forward for sure.
Yeah, it was a very impressive win. Joe Joyce getting in the main event, a pretty predictable win against Christian Hammer. Also, ESPN having on their website a picture of Huey Fury.
Yeah, that was funny.
That blew my fucking mind, dude. I was like,
I couldn't believe it. I didn't notice it until you said it. And then as soon as I looked, I was like, how did I not notice that before too? I must have just clicked on it quickly, but that was funny.
Because they kept showing video of Hammer on the telecast. So I was like, I'm just gonna go on ESPN real quick. I hadn't seen the Breidis fight, so I went on ESPN and I'm looking at that and I'm like, that doesn't look like the same guy.
Yeah, that's funny. I've never seen that before. And you'd think that maybe early on you'd see that, maybe they changed it, but I mean, they left it the whole way, so clearly they were okay with that. So that was funny.
The whole fucking time, bro.
Yeah, that was funny.
So Joe Joyce getting a very predictable win. Against Christian Hammer, 4th round knockout. Kind of did the Joe Joyce thing and just overwhelmed them with pressure and volume, and he's slow and shit and super hittable and all that. But I thought after the Dubois fight, I was like, because I was very impressed with Daniel Dubois. I was like, this is a guy who's on the verge of a big fight. what do we do with this guy? What's he do next?
No, I agree. It is a weird spot because obviously he got the job done against Christian Hammer, but Christian Hammer is Christian Hammer at this point. He's the guy that we all knew he was going to be able to beat. It was just kind of a matter of how quickly he was going to be able to get to him, and the body shots were able to get to him. But like you said, I mean, he's open. Obviously, the thing is about he's got a granite ass chin too, so he's able to walk through all these shots. It is Christian Hammer too, but he showed no like a bit of adjustments later on because he started to get to the body, but he was getting hit clean with those overhand rights multiple times in those first couple of rounds. And like Carl Frampton was saying on the broadcast, it's okay to do against a Christian Hammer, but if you're facing a Deontay Wilder or a guy like that, you're not going to be able to, like, you're going to be in some big trouble in those and taking those kind of shots. So the one guy who I think would be a good fight for him, they'd have to figure out obviously the politics of getting this fight made, but I think a Dillian White fight would be really interesting too, because that's a fight where obviously Joyce has the skills to kind of maybe keep White off him and stuff, but Dillian White has it. If he's able to crack and land that power on him, it'll be interesting to see how Joyce reacts. He probably will be able to take it, and I'd favor Joyce to win. But I mean, that would be a real fight for him. If he's not going to get that A-level guy next, I think Dillian White would be a perfect kind of level step up for him.
There's definitely that, because I feel like, first of all, in the Dubois fight, that was actually what impressed me about him, was he stayed behind the jab and he actually boxed kind of clean. It was still like that Joyce slow shit, but he did box responsibly. He basically closed the kid's eye with his jab. Yeah. This one, it felt like almost like a step back, where it's been, a year since he's fought, and he kind of looked how he looked early in his career, where his chin is super forward and up in the air. But all that being said, he throws very creative combinations. Like, he's throwing shit that is not real standard for heavyweights. He throws a lot of like right uppercuts to the body. And so even if he's getting hit, I just think what he puts on a lot of these guys offensively and with his conditioning, most of them can't stand up to it. But he hasn't really fought like those contender fights, like the Dillian White fight, Joseph Parker, Andy Ruiz. He hasn't fought that level of guy. So it feels like that's the obvious next step for him, no?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And that's why my hope, because I do like Joyce a lot too. He seems like a good guy and stuff. So just with the Hammer fight, I hope that it is more just playing down for the level of competition again. Obviously, knowing that Christian Hammer is not as dangerous as a Daniel Dubois. But no, I think it'll be interesting because, like you said, too, it's just people, I think, can underrate Joyce's skills just because of how slow he is and how just methodical it looks at times. But like you said, he's very creative with those punches. And once he gets going downhill, it's not easy to deal with that either. So I hope he does get that kind of step up to that mid-tier, like someone else in that top 10, to really just see exactly how good he is, too. Because he is looked at as a quote-unquote prospect. He is 14-0, but he's 36 years old, too. So you want to move him sooner rather than later and not have it be he's 41 years old by the time he gets one of those big fights also.
Or have it be like a Luis Ortiz situation, where you're just like a couple of years too late, which in some sense he may already be, but I think in heavyweight, age is a little bit of a different thing. Yeah. I mean, he's been hit a lot, but he hasn't had a lot of long fights.
Yeah.
So his punishment meter is still, I think, pretty low.
Yeah, especially for someone, he got into the pro game kind of late too. So he only has, like you said, 14 pro fights, and even when he's been hit, it doesn't seem like the shots affect him too much either, because he's clearly dishing out the more punishment. So I think he still does have a lot left in the tank for a 36-year-old.
So I think about him as in the contender fights, like we said, White and Parker and Ruiz, that level. I see him as like a 50-50. When I think about him against the top, right? Joshua, Usyk, Fury, Wilder, it's hard for me to imagine him beating any of those guys. Do you think he has a chance against the elite at heavyweight?
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can always say those guys, when they punch hard like that, they have a chance. But I think we look at fights the same kind of way. When I try to predict fights, I try to envision in my head and think about stylistically just what do we think is going to happen. And I just have a hard time against any of those four. Just stylistically, Joyce is going to have a hard time getting in on those kind of guys and being able to kind of get that downhill momentum. So, I mean, I wouldn't pick him to win any of those fights. I'm not going to count him out because we've seen crazier things, but I just think the movement of an Usyk or Fury, and even just the pinpoint accuracy of an AJ or Wilder would give him a lot of problems. And maybe if he's able to get to the back half of the fights, he can wear those guys down a bit. But I mean, I think that would be a tough ask for him. But we'll see what happens.
I think if he would beat any of them, he'd beat Joshua just on being able to overwhelm him a little bit.
Yeah, I agree.
I think, like you said, Usyk and Fury, their boxing skills are going to be a little too much. And I just think that Wilder's going to put him out at some point, even if he's winning the fight. But it's getting to the point where he kind of deserves the fights.
No, he does. Yeah, I agree.
You know, he's winning the fights that he's given. So at a certain point, it feels like he should get a shot. You said you didn't watch Opetaia and Breidis?
Yeah, I didn't. Well, I mean, I ended up seeing a good amount of highlights just yesterday and today, so I had a pretty good gauge of the fight. I just didn't watch it live. So, but I mean, definitely seemed like a good fight. Obviously, Opetaia did started really fast and looked like he was going to maybe even stop Breidis just from the highlights I was seeing. Just that straight left wasn't missing at all. And then Breidis obviously just didn't get the W at the end of the day, but just heart of a champion, just trying to rally back and doing everything he could to get that kind of Meldrick Taylor Chavez kind of finish at the end. It didn't work for him, but I mean, just an entertaining fight. And I kind of do wish that I had caught it live, but what are you going to do? Things happen and you miss fights.
It was a decent fight. To be honest with you, I scored it last night when I was watching, and I scored it a draw.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people saying that too. So,
and I was looking at the box rec. You know how they have like the average fan score?
Yeah.
And that was like a draw, pretty much. And the judges, 2 of them had it 8-4 for Opetaia. 1 of them had it 7-5. The 7-5 I can live with. The 8-4 is off. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like we've seen this pretty repeatedly with Australian boxing, where there's pretty iffy scoring. What's your take on that? One of the things that I noticed was that it seems very like acceptable for commentary and other parts of the broadcast to be very biased towards the Australian fighter. Did you notice that?
No, I did notice that a bit, even just the little highlights I've seen. And that's one thing that I think, even in these fights that the decision goes to the winner, it's something that's not talked about enough. Obviously, like a Dimitri Bivol Canelo fight over here, those cards all being 7-5, even though Bivol's the rightful winner, those aren't the right cards, and that's still not a correct representation of the fight. Even Haney against Kambosos, to have 2 of those cards, I think, be 8-4, and they were tied up through 6 rounds, just doesn't show you how the fight went either. So even in those kind of fights, I think those kind of fights like that, when people kind of just are okay with it and just say, oh, because the right guy won, it's okay at the end of the day, it leads you to these fights like this, where in a closer fight, those things really do matter. And I think it is something that everywhere it happens. You see it in the UK, you see it in Australia, you see it over here a bit of times, but it is something that, whether it's the commissions, whatever, you do need to kind of just figure out, because there's too many times you see guys lose opportunities on cards like that.
Yeah, and I Opetaia was very dominant in the first half of the fight, but he really slowed down. He got his jaw broken. He took a lot of punishment down the stretch. There was a lot of rounds that I think Breidis definitely won. And it was surprising to me, like, the old saying was like, to beat the champ, you got to beat the champ. And it didn't feel like at the end of the fight that either of them beat the other, what I'm saying? And the commentary seemed very forced, as far as like, oh, we clearly have a new champion. He's clearly won the fight. He's outboxed him and da-da-da-da-da. It was like, I don't know, man. We kind of just watched this fight. It's pretty even.
Yeah, and even that's what's just interesting too, because like I said, I mean, boxing scored on a round by round basis too. So if Breidis looked horrible the first 3 or 4 rounds and lost those rounds, well, if he's able to win 6 rounds after that, still, it doesn't matter how bad he looked early on, and if some of the rounds are close. If he wins 6 rounds, he wins 6 rounds. So like I said, I didn't watch the full fight, so I can't say. It did seem very close, so I definitely will say you're probably right on that one. So it is very interesting on that, because people do have to remember it is scored round by round, and no matter how hurt he looked early on, if you're able to win the amount of rounds to warrant a draw, you're able to win that amount of rounds. So it is definitely interesting.
It was very interesting. There's been some interesting matchups in the last couple of weeks. One of the things we talked about earlier, Akhmadaliev stopping Ronnie Rios. It seems like him and Stephen Fulton are the obvious next big fight at 122. What are your thoughts about that matchup?
So that's a fight I love. I really do hope to God that that's a fight that can get made. Obviously, you have a DAZN fighter, you have a Showtime fighter. They'll have to figure. That's for them to decide, not for us to decide as fight fans. We can just look forward to the fight. But that's a great fight. Obviously, MJ. A lot of people gave Ronnie Rios a good chance going into the fight. I always thought MJ would win, but he was a live dog, and MJ showed, even with the injury, just that he was able to get him up out of there. So that was really great. I think when you look at that fight, Fulton and MJ, I just think Fulton's length, skills, and his overall adaptability could be too much for him, because I just think when you look at the way he fought Angelo Leo and then Figueroa and then Danny Roman in 3 kind of different ways, and he was able to be successful in each way. Obviously, the Figueroa fight was close. I thought he probably won a 7-5 fight, but it was close. You could have even said a draw too. But I just think his adaptability, his length, and those kind of things could give MJ problems. I'm not going to count MJ out either, because I think he's a great fighter also, but I think Fulton's a bad style matchup for him.
So before the Rios fight, I was very much on that page. But then after watching the fight, one of the things that I noticed about MJ that I think could make him dangerous against Fulton is he's got gears.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, he starts the fight at one gear, and then once his left hand got hurt, the right hook started coming in like overdrive. And in the 12th, when Rios is really kind of out of gas and like limping to the finish line, he's at the highest gear he's been the whole fight, and he just comes out and wipes him out. I think that's a very dangerous guy when somebody's got different gears and like different levels that they can take it to. Because even if Fulton comes out and he's just outboxing him and being quick and doing all this, like, it's going to change in the 4th or 5th round. You know, I see Akhmadaliev's gears as a chance to win.
No, I agree. And even as you asked that question, I was thinking the same thing you were just thinking too, is Stephen Fulton get out to a couple of rounds advantage, but 12 rounds is a long time, 36 minutes to be in there. And if MJ is slowly wearing him down, slowly marching forward, even if Fulton is outboxing him and stuff, it's a long time to be in there. So even if I do edge Fulton in that fight, I mean, MJ is certainly a live dog, and I'm not saying it's a blow up by any means. I think it could definitely be a great fight.
It's a true 50-50.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's why people are excited about it. I'm also curious. Do you think at some point that Inoue should fight the winner of this fight?
And I think that should happen, honestly. I mean, I wondered before if 122 was maybe, just because that would be his 4th division, I think, at this point. But he looks to be that 118 isn't too easy to make for him. So I think he would fill out good to 122. And that's a fight that I really would be interested to see, because whoever wins that fight, because I mean, Inoue does still have the power and stuff, but those guys would stylistically have the ability to outbox him until basically maybe he would hurt him. So that's a fight that I couldn't even really pick until I see the MJ Fulton fight, and then see maybe the Monster fight again. But that's a fight that really intrigues me, and that would be, I think, that's why I think the Fulton MJ fight's a big fight. But I think that would just bridge towards the Inoue fight, and that could be undisputed versus undisputed, and that would be a fantastic fight.
Hopefully, we get to see it at some point.
Yeah.
Bam Rodriguez wiping the floor with Sri Sukeso Rungvisai. What is your take on this fight? How'd you feel about Bam's performance and all that?
Yeah, so I mean, I just think that Bam, I mean, he's my age, he's 22 years old. We're born around the same time too, but he's already a special fighter. He just fights like a veteran. He fights like he has 30-something fights, and that he's a multi-division world champion right now, honestly. Just the way he uses his angles, the way he uses that sharp jab, and just that he didn't take in the Quadras fight. I thought, I mean, he realized Quadras probably wasn't going to hurt him, but took a lot of risk kind of later on in the fight, and he realized that he was still able to hurt Sor Rungvisai, but in a more precise way, and just didn't let Sor Rungvisai get his feet set and get going either. So I think it was a fantastic performance by Bam.
I thought he was incredible, man. I thought he looked, especially when I'm watching young fighters, I'm looking for holes. Didn't see one, dude.
Yeah.
Didn't see not one fucking hole on this kid. He was boxing beautiful. He was giving him angles. Chocolatito and Estrada exchanged with Sor Rungvisai.
Yeah,
it gave him chances to land that power and like dictate of the fight a little bit more, whereas Bam never even gave him that opportunity. Do you think that Sor Rungvisai is the same guy that beat Chocolatito and split 2 fights with Estrada?
Yeah. So I think it's hard to say that he's the same guy, just because obviously times in those weight classes, you do age a lot quicker at 115 pounds. He's in his mid-30s, and it has been a couple of years. But I don't think by any means you could say that basically the win doesn't mean anything because Sor Rungvisai was washed or anything like that. I mean, just to say, just speaking on styles, obviously he was able to knock out Sor Rungvisai and went the distance with Quadras. But if that Quadras Sor Rungvisai fight had happened and Sor Rungvisai never got hurt, Sor Rungvisai very well may have won and would have became the reigning champion at that time too, and would have been looked at as still the same level as Estrada and Chocolatito. So though I don't think that any of those guys are really what they were in their peak, I think they still have a lot more left in the tank than some people, than the detractors might be given credit for also.
I think the win is extremely significant.
Mhm.
The main thing that I felt like, and I don't even know if it's age, but I felt like Sorong not fighting elite level guys for the last couple years, it definitely impacted the fight. I mean,
Mhm.
he's never been like a speed demon, but fuck, he was slow, dude.
Yeah.
He was fucking slow, man. And it was just bam, it was just like completely different levels.
Yeah, and that's why the styles thing was interesting too. Like I said, I mean, just Sorongosai with his feet. I mean, they've always been slow as shit, basically. But I mean, he was 2 steps behind Bam the whole time. And people always
Right.
talked about in the pre-fight build-up, oh, Sorongosai had the power, the power, the power. But if you're not able to set your feet and get that power and really have Bam in front of you, that power doesn't mean anything, as we saw too. So obviously he had the power, but if you're not able to set your feet and get going, you're not going to be able to land that power. And Bam didn't let him land it basically the whole night.
Yeah, not at all. I don't remember him taking any clean shots. Do you think the fact that his brother is a titleist and a really good fighter at that weight is going to impact his opportunities? Because I think Josh Franco, is scheduled to fight Juan Francisco Estrada, right?
Yeah, they are. So I think they're in between looking on because I think that Estrada and Chocolatito would still like to make that fight. So I think they might try to bypass the Franco fight. But either way, Franco is in the mix for all those guys. He's the WBA regular title holder right now. But I think it's because I do wonder and think that, I mean, even at 112, whether it's a Sonny Edwards, Julio Cesar Martinez, a Junto Nakatani, I think any of those fights would still be great for Bam. We'd all rather see him at 115. But just with Robert Garcia and what they've been saying and stuff, I think they do want him to, because I mean, if he can make 108 and 112, why rush the kid too? He's 22 years old. Bring him
Yeah.
back down to 112, have him be a multi-title holder. And I think, do you think that if he were to beat a Martinez, an Edwards, or a Nakatani, would he almost all but lock up that fighter of the year? I mean, we have to see how a Spence Crawford fight plays out or any of those other things, but he would then have 3 big wins, 2 not even at his natural weight class against champion level guys. In the last fight, he'd be taking a belt from a champion. So what do you think about him in the fighter of the year race?
He is up there, man.
Mm-hmm.
There's no doubt about it. For me, it's like him or Bivol right now. And
Yeah.
depending on what Bivol does with the rest of the year, if he doesn't fight again or he doesn't have another big fight this year, I think that Bam Rodriguez is the front runner.
Yeah.
To be 22 years old and like wipe the floor with 2 guys that are like top guys from the era before you, you know, it was early to take that Sorong fight, bro. Like,
Yeah.
it's other fighters or other management teams or whatever would have steered him away from that.
Yeah. No, and that's what even Robert Garcia had said. I listened to an interview Robert had said, but just that, and even I hope that's the thing that in hindsight and just that people don't kind of dismiss, just because he made Sorong look older and those kind of things. I hope people don't forget that, like you said, just a lot of people were kind of saying, is this too much too soon? Do we really want to put him in with a guy like Sorong? Obviously, he showed he was ready for it, but I hope people do remember that was the thought process going into. A lot of people were wondering, was it too quick, too soon? Could he get chin checked in a fight like this? And he showed obviously that wasn't going to happen. But I hope people do remember that, and just revisionist history doesn't kind of come back to bite him a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he was, and not even downplaying Sorong, I thought he was going to wipe the floor with him just because the amount of skill that he's showing. A lot of the lower weight guys, I think they feel obligated to be super aggressive because it's like people aren't paying attention to the lower weight, so we need to make it entertaining. Whereas this guy is all skill, and the entertainment comes because he's so much better than who he's in the ring with. But I just don't remember ever seeing a guy below 118 that fights like him.
No, and that's why even just some people don't like, I mean, they get kind of sick of hearing the words, oh, the eye test. But that's why right away for him, I looked at him just for the same reason you said, and I was like, wow, this kid, he's only, at that time, he was probably 20 or 21, but I was like, this kid's a special fighter right now. And I didn't know how they were going to move him at that time, but I was like, when they put him in with these top level guys, like you said, just the stylistically thing too, where a lot of those guys like to stand and trade. I was like, he's going to be a problem for a lot of those guys. And we're seeing that right now already.
And with a lot of the young guys, right, it's like we still have to do the eye test because they haven't fought anybody.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As this kid's actually taken the step up fights and dominated them. So we don't have to do the eye test anymore. We could arguably, like, he has more of an argument on the pound for pound list than like a Boots Ennis.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of guys that I think are super dope and skilled that I'm still going off of the eye test because they haven't beaten anybody.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why like the Quadras and Sorong wins, especially because he's still not even a 115 pounder. Like the fact that he can make 108 at 112 still, it's just crazy that he's looking that good and just even that strong against a Sor Rungvisai kind of guy. Just he was able to beat him down and take him out too, which is really crazy.
It'll be very interesting to see how 115 plays out as a weight class. I think ultimately, I mean, I don't know if that's been canceled, but I had read that Estrada and Franco were going to fight sometime in August.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see, you know, what exactly Chocolatito does next, how active he wants to be and all that. But I think that Chocolatito and Rodriguez is like one of the best fights in boxing. And I think also since Chocolatito's come back from the losses, he's been much smarter. Like he's been much more calculated in his defense and how he approaches the fight. I just think it's, if anything, it's like maybe even a better fight now in some ways.
Yeah, no, I agree because Chocolatito, like I said, he's still someone who he'll always stand and trade and kind of have that Mexican-ish style, like they like to say, but he has fought a lot behind and he does a good job of fighting behind his high guard also, and keeping his hands up and just not getting hit as much as he used to also. So with Bam, especially the angles, a big kind of things like that, and just keeping that high guard up will stop some of Bam's angle and stuff. And I would still pick, and even it's funny that before this Sor Rungvisai fight, I still would have probably just on the eye test that we hadn't seen it proven as much yet, but I would have liked Bam stylistically in that fight, and I still do. But I mean, Chocolatito is another guy too that, like we thought Sor Rungvisai could have done, is going to be there for 12 rounds and in a different way. That kind of pitter patter with still a lot of power, but that activity and the punches being there for all 12 rounds will be interesting to see how that fight could play out. I'm not sure, like you said, with Franco being at 115 now, if you'll see Bam drop down, if we'll ever get to see that fight. But that's the number one fight I think I'd like to see for Bam, because that would just be a great, another just an official passing of the torch moment also.
I bring this guy up as much as possible, but again, I think him and Inoue is a great fucking fight.
Yeah.
Just on the fact that Rodriguez's skills travel with the weight. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just think that that's a fight that's in the future. It's not right now, but I think that's somewhere down the road.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And because especially if Bam's at 15 now and is maybe going back to 12, and Fulton's maybe thinking about going to, I mean, not Fulton, Inoue's thinking about maybe going to 22 to fight a Fulton or an MJ. Like you said, it wouldn't happen now, but that's one of those fights to talk about stylistically too. It's just a great match where almost anything could happen too. Inoue would be the bigger, stronger guy. So could his power get to Bam? It could. But those angles and stuff are going to, because Inoue, I love him. He's a pound for pound top fighter, but he's still like those angles and stuff would provide a lot of problems for him too. So I would be so interested to see how that fight would play out, because he would have some issues with Bam's angles for sure, and just the overall speed.
It would give him something to think about. It would give him a different look than he's gotten, because even like Donaire, who's a great fighter, one of my personal favorites, but he's definitely to some extent like a in and out, straight out kind of guy. You know what I mean? He doesn't have the same kind of switch ups that Bam does. He has other things. He's got speed and great generational power and whatever, but I just think that's a matchup that if they wanted to get real creative and make a lot of money, I think that's a great fight.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that. And that's a good thing too, is obviously Inoue, I think, in his late 20s, still so young enough. Bam's only 22, so that's what, like you said earlier too, they have time for that fight too. That's a fight where you can still build up Bam's resume, and that's a fight that you can make maybe 4 or 5 years down the road. And maybe by that time, that becomes a passing of the torch where Bam's able to move up and beat it in a way and really take kind of that crown as the number one kind of guy in the lower weight classes. But we'll see. Like you said, time is on both their sides at this moment. So we'll see in the future what happens.
There's a lot of great matchups at the lower weights right now, man. Another fight that got announced this week, Michaela Mayer and Alicia Baumgardner are going to be fighting on the undercard of Savannah Marshall and Clarissa Shields, which I didn't even know that fight got signed. So I basically found out about both of them at once. What do you think about this card?
So I think that's a great card. I think some people were wondering if Mayer Baumgardner would be a stateside fight, like an ESPN main event kind of fight, just so they could have just, both those girls are very marketable too. So it could be a fight that you could have had a lot of press on them. But I mean, being the co-main event too, Shields Marshall, you can't be upset with too, because over there, that's going to be a huge event. I think it just continues just the great trend that women's boxing's on right now too. I mean, you saw Taylor Serrano with Franchon Cruz Dezern. You had 2 undisputed fights back then too, and now you have 1 unified and 1 undisputed fight, but basically 2 undisputed type fights once again on the same card. So I think it just continues a great year for women's boxing.
It's great too to have 2 big fights like that on the same card. You know what I'm saying? Because for the most part, I mean, obviously the Cruz Dezern fight was a big deal, but she's not, to me, she's not on the same skill level as either Katie Taylor or Amanda Serrano. Whereas this is like two for real fucking, if you know boxing, you know these are like legit matchups. You know?
And those are two fights too, where obviously the Cruz Cezern fight wasn't really built up as a main event type fight, where Mayer Baumgartner, you basically do have two main events in one also. So it does speak to just the level of opposition on this card. Also, it's a high level.
I was thinking about it. Isn't it maybe like too good of a fight to be an undercard fight?
That's what I was wondering. That's why I think a lot of people stateside have just been saying, oh, they wish it could have been an ESPN main event type fight. Because, I mean, besides Shields Marshall or Taylor Serrano, that wouldn't be the co-main event for any other fight in women's boxing. The number you would never see on the men's side, basically, a top 5 fight that you could possibly make be a co-main event. So I think it'll be great for them. I'm sure it'll be a huge money event. But I do still kind of wish that it could have been an ESPN main event kind of fight, because ESPN had invested a lot in Michaela Mayer, and they were into building up that Baumgartner fight too. So I think they would have loved to have that fight be on an ESPN main event. But I mean, I have no problem with it being overseas also.
What is it going to be streamed on?
I'm not sure. I know that Shields and Marshall are on Boxer, so I'm not sure if it would be that. And I think or Sky Sports maybe. So I think ESPN Plus would maybe pick that up for over here. So that's something that's interesting to see what'll figure out, because the ESPN Plus would have to pick that up, I'm sure, especially with them having Michaela. But it'll be interesting. I think it would be Sky Sports or Boxer. I get confused with who's on which one over there, but it would be one of those two, I believe, over there.
It would be a real shame, bro, if that was only on Sky Sports.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
The way Claressa's last fight was, that would really do a disservice to those matchups. I hope whoever's in charge of that understands that.
Yeah, I agree. And just because, especially where you have Claressa, Michaela, and Alicia, you have 3 out of the 4 main event women on there are American women who have a pretty good following too. So I think it would be a shame on ESPN Plus or whoever if they didn't pick that fight up too, because you'd get a solid viewing over here for that fight also.
Let me just look real quick. It can't hurt to look. Let's see if they say ESPN what the streaming is. It's in September, right?
Yeah, I believe so.
They don't have it on the schedule. See, that's already an issue.
Yeah.
That should be on the schedule. You know when that's going down.
That's the problem with ESPN Plus too, is I feel like just they will pick up these fights, but sometimes it's on such late notice. Like even like the Joyce fight this weekend, it was only I think a handful of weeks ago, if not maybe even just last week, that they announced that they were picking that fight up on ESPN Plus too. So they do have a tendency that they have a good track record of picking up fights, but they pick them up so late also too, that it's harder to promote a fight like that when you just put it on a couple of weeks notice saying, hey, we're picking this fight up. It is harder. So you'd hope that they can get that done soon. Should already have it on now, like you said.
Yeah, even in this article on ESPN, I'm just skimming through it. They're announcing the fight, but they're not. There's nowhere that it makes clear, hey, this is where you can watch it.
Yeah, that is weird. So hopefully they can get that figured out too, because it's a big event and people will want to watch it. So you'd hope that they'd get that figured out.
It is a big event, and that's, I think, in some ways where like boxing has to catch up. If you had a men's fight that was this big, like you know exactly where you're fucking watching it.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, I guess lastly, this weekend we got Mark Magsayo and Ray Vargas. I know these are not two big names unless you're ahead like you and me.
Yeah.
But this is a good fight, no?
No, I think it's a great fight, great card. I mean, I am so excited for this card, honestly, this weekend. And obviously, Magsayo had the win over Gary Russell. Obviously, he had the injuries in that fight, but Magsayo is the champion right now. And he's someone who, with Manny Pacquiao's promotions, they have built up. And I am a fan of Ray Vargas. So I think that fight's an interesting stylistic matchup. Then even the undercard is going to be great too. You have Brandon Figueroa against, I think, Carlos Castro in the co-main event. And then you have
that's a great one. I didn't know that.
And then you even have Rashidi Ellis is returning and Frank Martin both on that card. So just those 4 fights, you don't see many cards having quality fights with those 4 guys on it. So I really can't wait for the main event and even just the card in general. Showtime did a great job putting it together.
I don't even think I knew that was the undercard. That's crazy. I love that.
It's fantastic. Fight.
That's a great matchup. And kudos to Castro for taking that right off of the Neri fight.
Yeah.
Tough couple of fights back to back, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like I say, Figueroa's not one to come lay down either. So they're going to come to fight in that one. So it's a great co-main event for them to have too. Because I think even the main event, they'll be coming to fight also. So it'll be a great night of boxing for sure.
I like the challenge that Castro presents, because he has a little bit more just like he just has better fundamentals, I would say, than Figueroa. So it'll be interesting to see if he's able to nullify some of that pressure. As far as the Magsayo Vargas fight, you know, towards the tail end of the HBO era, I mean, Ray Vargas was like a staple of HBO boxing. And to me, it looked like he was on the verge of becoming like a big deal. And I think between HBO boxing ending, him being injured, the pandemic, all these other things, it's kind of stalled his momentum because he's fought like once in the last 3 years. But I think this will be a good fight to remind people how good of a fighter he is.
No, I absolutely agree. And I'm someone just Ray Vargas. I like I like. I mean, if you're entertaining, I like you. If you're skilled, I like you. I like basically almost every boxer out there. But he is someone who I do really like. I like both of them, but I think stylistically too, with Magsayo is a tough guy, but I think there are some holes in his game that Ray Vargas can exploit. We'll see what happens. Anything can happen in that fight, but I think it's a great comeback fight for Ray Vargas. I think he will win a decision in that fight, and just to become champion once again too, because he is, I think, already a 2-time champion. He'll become a 3-time champion. Just he's someone interesting moving forward. You'll see there's still decent fights for him to make also.
What do you think about the narrative that Ray Vargas is a boring fighter?
I mean, I guess whenever I hear those kind of things, I try to put myself in like the casuals kind of so like maybe their kind of perspective. I still don't really see it. I mean, it's just so hard for us sometimes, like you said, we're pure boxing fans, so it's hard for us to kind of detach from where we are and kind of see it. So I mean, I can kind of, I guess, see a bit. I don't agree with it for sure. I won't really co-sign. I think he's a good fighter, and even just those skill guys still do entertain me, even if they're not getting hit with a million punches. It still does entertain me. So I understand it might not be everybody's cup of tea. So I can see maybe why people would say that, but I wouldn't agree with it, honestly. But I mean, that's the big kind of thing is everyone, like if someone's not getting hit a lot or something like that, if they're not fighting the way people want to fight, they'll call them boring and those kind of things. So I'm kind of used to hearing those kind of things, but I wouldn't agree with it.
I think as far as that, there are fights of his where he keeps it on the end of the jab and he keeps it on the outside, and it's a little bit like every round is the same. But Bivol has some of that. Dimitri Bivol has some of that, where there's fights where he's way more skilled than the other guy, and every round just looks the same, and he's probably not going to get a knockout. But the skill level is there. But to me, I mean, if you look back at some of his old fights, like Vargas's fight with Ronnie Rios was incredible, dude. That was a crazy fight. There was another one too, the Armenian guy, Ovanesian.
Yeah, a crazy egg, yeah.
Dude, that fight was fucking unbelievable. So there's been fights. I look at Vargas a little bit like Lara, where he's had some fights where he's super technical and he does this. So even when he has a banger, like people already have this reputation of him as like a boring fighter.
Yeah. No, I think that's why I'm happy you brought up Bivol too, because I hadn't thought about that, but that's a good comparison kind of too, where they both kind of have a tendency to, where like you said, obviously Vargas had kind of some lows in his career. And if they're fighting someone kind of below their level, they'll kind of, I mean, they'll still clearly show that their level's above, but they'll kind of fight down to that level of competition also. Whereas I think
cruise.
Yeah, whereas I think like our Ray Vargas against Mark Magsayo won't allow him to be that way this weekend too. So I think it'll look for an even better Ray Vargas, kind of like we saw Bivol against the Canelo or guys like that also. I think it'll bring out a better fighter for him too, stylistically.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that Vargas is going to have is that I think Magsayo is definitely like the biggest, strongest, most explosive guy that he's ever been in the ring with. And I think that Magsayo probably hits hard enough to sleep Vargas at any time. And I don't know that Vargas has been in that position before. It'll be interesting to see how he handles that explosiveness.
Yeah, because that was the thing. Even in I'm a big fan of Gary Russell too. So when I had watched that fight against Magsayo, that was the thing I noticed right away, just how big and strong Magsayo is. Just he's got the broad for 126 pounders. You don't see many guys with just the broad shoulders, just all the way through. He's filled out. He looks like he's probably 145 pounds on fight night too. So that'll be his advantage, even as maybe it's like kind of like how we did in this Julio Ceja fight. He'll be losing the fight early on. I think that was on one of the Wilder Fury undercards a year and a half ago, but losing the fight early, but then kind of using his strength, kind of trying to wear down Ray Vargas so he can eventually hurt him. So I think stylistically it's an interesting fight that can go either way, honestly, too. So it'd be interesting to see how it plays out.
It's a great 50-50 fight. I definitely think that Magsayo is going to have to be more consistent than he was against Gary, because once Gary, it was like maybe the 5th round where he hurt his shoulder, the 4th round, something like that. And as opposed to like ramping up his dominance, it felt like they both kind of coasted, and Gary was able to kind of get a rhythm and even win some rounds with just left hand.
Mhm.
And I think if Magsayo allows the fight to go into that rhythm, it's going to be really hard to get past Vargas's height and reach and all of those things if he allows the fight to get into a cruise mode.
No, I agree. Because even in the Russell fight, obviously, like I said, Russell, obviously people joke about, or some guys, oh, this guy was kind of hurt. He had one hand, but he legitimately had one hand. He was throwing only his left hand, and that was it. And he even had enough success where, I mean, he was able to win 4, 5, maybe even 6 rounds in that fight still, too. So obviously, Magsayo did get the decision, and Price still did do enough to edge him, but that was a for sure a close fight, and Price shouldn't have been as close a fight just being how hampered he was. So it'll be interesting to see how Magsayo, just obviously, they'll watch the film on that. They'll adjust on that, knowing obviously against the Ray Vargas, they have to fight differently too. So I can't wait to see what happens.
And also, I felt like he was dominant enough in the first 5 rounds against Gary, where it's like there's something to build on here.
Yeah,
like, I personally thought that he clearly won, but there was more opportunities to have that be more of a statement win, with the fact that he was timing him and hitting him with nice shots, and he was throwing that uppercut to the body. He had some interesting shit he was doing. I just felt like his pace or his focus kind of, flatlined. And I think if he does that against Ray, he's fucked.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because like I said, I mean, early on in that fight, those first like 3, 4 rounds, his speed, and that's why obviously watching as a Russell fan, even before the injury, that's what really did. I was like, holy shit, we're in for a real fight. Just the timing of Magsayo, just overall speed too. I think that caught Gary off guard a little bit too. And I think that'll be interesting to see, like you said, how they sit down and how they've looked at in training camp and how they got to use that to their advantage come Saturday night.
Yeah. Are there any other matchups coming up that you're excited about?
I mean, obviously for next weekend, I think that's it. Oh, I mean, is Derek Chisora, Kubrat Pulev? I don't know. Is that next weekend also? Or that might be the weekend after. I mean, it's not the most high level heavyweight fight, but I mean, they'll be in there banging. So anytime Chisora is fighting, I mean, I'll most likely watch it. So that'll be interesting. I have no idea how that fight's going to play out. I'd probably expect Pulev to win, but over there with the cards, you never know either. But that's another fight that I guess intrigues me also a bit.
I think that's a very good matchup. I think Chisora is like one of those guys there's kind of one of them in every era where they're just like super tough against every single guy. If you're not absolutely elite, he's going to knock you out. And if you are elite, he's going to give you a hard time. He's just like right at that in between. And I think Pulev is like one loss away from not being in the mix. So I think this is kind of an interesting fight as far as, both of them are kind of at like their last opportunity, even if it's come in very different ways. I feel like they're both kind of at their last opportunity to stay in the mix as an elite heavyweight.
No, I definitely agree. Like I said, it is kind of just that last kind of final shot for that. Because if they do want one more payday at that mid-tier kind of level, it'll be big. And even just obviously Chisora gets a lot of slack for his record and his losses, this, that. I mean, not really, and that's not really big boxing fans saying that, but I mean, just you need guys like him. And the heavyweight division is not the deepest division either, so you need guys like him that are willing to fight every single basically A or B level heavyweight out there. He's almost fought, so you need more guys like him out there. I think that are willing to fight every single guy out there, and I think it's just a testament. That's why he still had. With all these losses and the way some of the fights go, he still has all that fanfare around him and stuff. Just because he's an interesting guy, he comes to fight and all those things. And people, I mean, like we were even saying now, we'll be tuning in Saturday, and just I think a lot of people will be also just to see how he goes.
Because you have to look at. I always say this: you have to look at the context of his losses. Like there's a split decision loss to Tyson Fury in that.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying. So that says way more than a win over somebody that nobody knows.
Absolutely.
You know I don't know if you remember. You remember I was talking to my guest last week about him, but do you remember Glenn Johnson?
Yeah. Like the light super middleweight, light heavyweight, right? Yeah.
I feel like Derek Chisora is a little bit like Glenn Johnson. He's maybe not quite at that level because Glenn Johnson actually became a world champion and all that, but I think that he serves kind of a similar purpose at heavyweight where it's like he's just always the tough out.
Yeah. No, I agree because, like you said, even before about just kind of testing yourself, it really does show if you're a heavyweight and you want to see if you're at that kind of elite level. If you fight Derek Chisora, you'll find out because, like you said before, if you're a level above him or whatever, you will show that and you will beat him. But if you're at the same kind of level or a bit kind of below or kind of slacking a bit or not having full attention, he will catch you too. So it is kind of a great, especially that's why I think so many guys have also fought him recently too. Because if you're a promoter, it's a great guy to gauge against. Also, hey, Derek Chisora, like you said, He's fought Dillian White twice. He's fought Fury. He's fought Klitschko. He's fought just, I mean, everyone basically out there. So it is a great just read on guys also.
And he really doesn't ever turn in a dud. He's never in a bad fight. He never has like a performance where I'm like, he looked like shit. He fucking, he obviously didn't. Like, he's always training hard. He always puts on a good show. He may not always win, but I don't know. I have a lot of respect for guys like that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like I said, I mean, he's now 44 fights into his career and probably 20 or so against really valid level opposition too. So the fact that he's never had, even just in the heavyweight division, you expect to maybe see a dud here or there, stylistic matchup against somebody, but just he comes to fight every time. And like I said, no matter who he's been against, he's always been great TV. So that's why I think you still see him on these high profile events now.
I mean, just look at his last 3 fights, 2 fights with Joe Parker and a fight with
Usyk. Yeah.
You know, if you put all of the top heavyweights in the world and you put their resumes of who's fought who, his is by far the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of anybody at heavyweight.
Yeah, no, that's why I even think going forward that he can be one of those guys. He's obviously appreciated now, but even more once he retires, too, people will look back. And when you just even scroll through the box rack or see things like that, you are like, wow, you know, he really did fight damn near everybody out there too. So I think he definitely does get a lot of respect for that, and will get a lot more respect going forward on that also.
I agree, and particularly if he was able to beat Pulev, I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but if he's able to win that fight, I it's just one of those things where it's like, see, I told you, he's always ready, you know. Jack, is there anything you want to shout out before we wrap this one up?
I mean, obviously, not that these people haven't heard it before, but obviously just we're both members of ITRBoxing. So just ITRBoxing.com is a great place. Just obviously if you're looking for articles, podcasts, anything like that, our YouTube channel also. And then just I'm active on Twitter a lot just for boxing, whatever too. So Jack Kelly _18 on Twitter. You guys can follow me on there. Just I'm talking boxing almost every day, retweeting stuff myself. So just I think that and ITRBoxing are the places to be. And just thank you for having me on. I hope to be on once again in the near future.
Yeah, bro. We'll definitely do it again. ITR gang all day. Jack, it was good talking to you, brother. I'll talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Peace, buddy.
Peace out.